Welcome, everybody, to another DoneJS contributors meeting. My name is Justin Meyer, your host with the most, because our good friend Chasen is on client work this week. But hopefully he'll be back. Well, he'll be actually, I think, in Paris 2 weeks from now, but then he should be back after that. So you'll have much better hosting duties performed than I've been able to do. So with us, as usual now, thankfully, is Sheriff. Hey, Sheriff.
Hey.
That's great. That's a great shirt you have. I like it.
Thank you.
And Matthew, how's it going?
Hello.
How are you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing okay. A little under the weather today.
Oh no. The kids get you sick?
Yeah.
They're just little disease factories.
Just cough right in your face and don't even apologize.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They never cover their mouth, no matter how much you ask them to.
Well, you just have to have hand wipes all the time, right?
Yeah, but like if it does right in your face, what are you supposed to do?
Wipe your eyeballs.
Bleach your face.
And then Thomas Dillard, how are you doing?
Still getting used to new technology, apparently. But other than that, fantastic.
Good. Glad to hear. It's good to extend yourself. And then we have a new person, Thomas Wilburn.
Hello.
Oh, I wasn't sure, since you were on the little camera up until, or on the little screen up until now, I thought that might have been a big, giant stuffed bear behind you or something.
No, we're still unpacking.
Unpack? Oh yeah, welcome to Chicago.
Thank you.
Hopefully you like it as much as I have. So this is the team today. We are gonna go straight into demos, then we're gonna do statuses, and then we are going to talk about the survey results. Thanks again for everybody who voted. So I think, Kevin, you got something to show us.
Yep. Let me share my screen. Make this bigger. Yeah, so I've been working a lot on routing stuff, but the thing I've been doing for the last couple of days is this new recipe. So under recipes, there's this search list details recipe. We kind of open this up. And what this is a search app for searching Rick and Morty characters. So you can type in a character. Hopefully this works. You'll get a list of all the Mortys that exist, and then you can click on one of these and you'll see the details about this Morty and kind of go back, and all of the routing is working and all this kind of stuff. But the big thing that this is showing off, if I reload this, hopefully it'll work. This one. Cool. So the big thing that this is showing off is progressive loading of routes. So if I click on, when I get to this list page, you can see the first thing it does is actually load all the code for the list page. Then if I clear this out and go to the details page, it's progressively loading the module for the details page. So that's what this is going through. Everybody take a look at it. Hopefully you find it interesting. The other thing that I have been working on is taking all these kind of new techniques and putting them into the routing guide itself. So this is kind of my local copy, but this should get published later today. But this kind of goes through a lot of the same stuff in a little bit more detail. So it's talking about the new strategies we're using for connecting the route data to a single property on your view model instead of connecting it to the view model itself. And then it's showing how to do programmatic instantiation of your components for your routes, and then down at the bottom it actually goes through how to do progressive loading with this ES6 dynamic imports, and it also talks about Steel and Webpack dynamic imports. So yeah, that should land today, and hopefully everyone can take a look, and hopefully you find it useful.
Awesome. Yeah, I've long waited for a good routing guide. Thank you for putting that together. Matthew, do you want to go next?
Yeah, why not? I've been working on incremental rendering for DoneJS 3 for a while. I think I actually showed something like this off a few weeks back. When I started working on incremental rendering, the one thing that I really wanted it to fix was change the way that we listen to mutations to be based on mutation observers. And so when I started working on that, I was working on a demo page just to test it out and develop it. And it kind of looked like this. But then when I when I got to the point where I actually started wanting to upgrade some of our apps, like currently I'm upgrading this Dog Things app, I wanted to have that demo page available and use the same demo page. It's a very nice way to be able to like actually fix bugs and stuff, to find bugs and fix bugs. So I created this little web component. It's an ES module, and you pass it an HTML page. In this case, it's just the regular development.html page for this DoneJS app. It will load that into an iframe here, and then it will set up mutation observers based on this, and it will patch it to this side. So this side is a clone of this side, but then with mutations applied to it. And then also it turns on logging as well. So this made it really nice to like figure out like because most of the problems that occur, most of the bugs that I find are something with like, it's usually like finding the right index, trying to find out like this mutation happened here, where's the corresponding place over here. So having the logging on and all that makes it really nice to work with. Not something that anyone else will ever use, but as I upgrade more of these apps, it's going to be a great way just to be able to quickly see if there are any problems before, as I upgrade them. One cool thing about this has the logging. I was kind of inspired by can debug logging and the can queues logging and all that stuff. So I created some similar logging for here. But this is kind of a cool way to see what actually happens in a DoneJS application. Like I said, what this does is it takes that development.html page, loads it in iframe, clones it over here, and then you get all the further mutations. So in this case, we see like a couple of styles being inserted. Now this won't actually happen in the real incremental rendering because we won't send the page until the styles have already loaded. But in this case, I do it earlier. And then you get a huge batch. So this is like each one of these is one like batch of mutations. So that happens, and then you get this big batch of mutations. And what this actually is, this is done auto render because done auto render like removes everything from the head and replaces it with what's in the index.stash, and it does the same thing for the body. So you can kind of see what's going on here. First, it removes 3 elements and 3 nodes, and then it inserts 3 more. So these are, I assume this is probably the old text node, the old title, and then another text node. So then we do the same thing back. We're kind of reinserting the title, which is lab bound. Then we remove some more stuff. This looks like it's probably coming from the body. And then we're inserting a bunch of stuff, can imports, a header and a main element. And then, so that's kind of that set of mutations. This is all done auto render. Then there's another style loading, which I bet is probably the progressive loading style, I would assume. And another mutation, this is probably happens after a can import. We're importing this product list component. And I'm not going to tell you every single thing, but
Matthew, do you think this would be useful though, like debugging issues, like
It'll be useful for debugging bugs in in the incremental rendering libraries for sure.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know.
I just wonder if people would want to see their apps. Like I could imagine even maybe not that, but just like as incremental rendering is, you can see like your app like actually loading in the iframe and the incremental being written out, so you can see them side by side. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what this does. I'd like to. I was like, it'd be really cool if I could like add some type of a bar down here to like. Well, first I wanted to like have a way to like slow it down, so I could like slow down the mutations to like once every second, so I could see them happen super slowly. Yeah. And I also thought it'd be cool to have like a what do you call that? Where you could like rewind.
Yeah.
Time traveling.
Mutations.
Kind of yeah. Go back and forth, but that'd be kind of hard. Well, let me finish up real quick here. There's a couple of other things I wanted to show. Here you see like these are each of the LIs, so each of the items in the list. So you see product 3, then product 4, product 5, et cetera, et cetera. These all happen, not at the same time. And then lastly, this is actually the first product, even though it says product 3. This is actually the first one. After that happens, you get this text mutation, and that's for this card count. So anyways, that's kind of the order that it happens.
One odd thing that I'm seeing here is like some of those could be inserted as a fragment, I'm guessing. To me, it looks like it's inserting like a text node, then an LI, then a text node, but it would be faster. I mean, if it's just those 3, it's probably all right. But if it was like a case where like we're writing out all of this sequential HTML, it tends to be much faster to like put that all in a document fragment and then add it all at once. And I wonder if the library could identify when you're doing a bunch of sequential appending and put it in a document fragment and then insert the document fragment. It's not a performance thing right now, but like that would be a nice fine tuning.
Yeah, it could do that. Just so it's clear, this is a list of the mutations. These are like the mutations that were sent. The mutation observer doesn't know about document fragments. You know, that doesn't exist to mutation observers. So this is what gets encoded, but not necessarily what actually happens. This is not what happens on this side. You know what I mean? This is reading what happens.
CanJS definitely does it as a fragment.
No, I know. I'm saying this is reading what happens on this side via mutation.
No, I know. Yeah. I'm letting the viewers know.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, you would never, even if I made that happen, you would never see this. This would never turn into a document fragment, I don't think. Instead, this would maybe do some type of document fragment thing. It might like combine these into one mutation.
You could do it on that other side too. You could just see that the mutations were sequential.
You could.
Same node, and then just.
You could. That kind of takes the purity away. It's just literally repeating what mutation observer. But I mean, there's already some stuff, special stuff that it does.
Yeah. All right.
Anyways,
cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of a cool thing. So anyways, I'll be using this as I create the other apps. It's been very helpful to me.
Awesome. Fun demo. Thomas Dillard, you want to go next?
Yeah, I have been. Let me see if I can share my screen here. I have been working on just incremental upgrades of documentation and sort of quality assurance with that. So we're getting nice, good code pin examples. I'm working on highlighting just to draw like what the period above is about. You know, this is a fairly, relatively speaking, simple, just getting it all nice and clean, quality assured.
Yeah, but you can't, one cannot really document too well. One can document too much, I think, because, you know, you could just be too laborious with your language, but no, I don't think it's possible for an open source framework to have too good of documentation.
I definitely agree with that, and as I'm going through these docs, I certainly appreciate them.
Good. I'm just also happy that someone else is working on documentation, because I feel like I've personally written a huge swath, because I always feel reticent to task people with open source, because it's not the most fun or glamorous, so I end up a lot of times taking it on myself. But to have one thing that I think we should do going forward is pretty much always have someone else review any documentation that anybody else wrote.
I definitely think that's fair. I'm sure there's like a lot of cognitive bias. I mean, you guys have practically written frameworks, so it's difficult to know what level people are coming in at.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. And then someone who's just been here for like, I think 3 days. This is day number 3.
This is the 3rd day.
Do you have anything to show us? Some juicy IE 11 details?
Who doesn't get excited about Internet Explorer 11, right? Like, it's everyone's favorite. So let's take a look. Let's see, your entire screen share. Okay. So Internet Explorer 11 is something that we would like to support, and so I've been working on trying to get that up and running here. It helps that I'm on a Windows machine. So part of this has just been getting the tests passing. And part of what has gone into that is making sure that the environment is actually polyfilled in a way that it will work in Internet Explorer. So right now, that means polyfilling promises, object.assign, and weak sets. I think in the long run, it may be possible to only get away with polyfilling promises. Object.assign, we can probably do through reflect. And weak sets, I'm interested in whether or not we can work around, since weak maps are supported, whether or not those could be used instead. But once those things are polyfilled, I've mostly just been going through and trying to make sure that these tests would actually run and pass. So this is not even the entire test framework. This is only, I think, the first 2 tests running. And we're already getting some failures, but that's good because if it dumps out because of, say, a syntax error, or which actually we've got one, there's a class keyword that's throwing here in one of the tests. If it dumps out because of any of those, we don't even get to the tests in the first place. And so part of the goal is to just get them to show up and fail so that then we can fix. Some of the issues that have come up during this have actually been kind of interesting. And they tend to be a little fiddly sometimes. So for example, here in can DOM data, but this also comes up in can component, there's a test for whether something should be removed. And that was previously just asking whether document.contains. The problem in Internet Explorer 11 apparently is that the document does not inherit from the node interface. So although nodes have a contains method, the document actually doesn't. So we have to extend that out and use the document element to ask whether or not that will work. Previous issues that we've had in a few places, let's see, specifically in can define. For our define maps and our define lists, they were setting some properties using object descriptors, and those descriptors were not setting configurable true, which in other browsers is fine because they actually check the value of what you're assigning, and if it's the same, they let that go through, even if configurable was not set to true, meaning that the property was sealed. But in Internet Explorer, they don't check the identity of the value. They just throw the moment you try and redefine a non-configurable property. So those needed to be updated. So a lot of it is just working around places where it has an odd idea of inheritance or an odd implementation of the standards. But for the most part, there's been some stuff in Observe that has involved get property symbols and proxies. I don't think in theory this stuff should be called, but I don't know.
Can observe don't. There's no that can't work in IE11.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's been kind of interesting because one of the things that's been a little frustrating has been remembering how bad the dev tools are in IE. So I get to in the debugger, if I just tell it to break on unhandled exceptions, Steal.js will steal those things and handle them so it can log them out itself, or the tests will do that, one of the two. So that won't work. So what I've been doing is setting a debugger statement and then changing this once it hits the debugger to break on all exceptions so that I don't get caught in a bunch of module loading or Babel tests or feature tests. So it's been interesting, but we're making progress, and we'll see as soon as that, as soon as we can figure out what the story for IE11 is, but I'm optimistic so far.
Awesome. If you happen to figure out in IE11 how you can rethrow an error so it will show up nicely, let Matthew know, and I'm sure he'll because you saw it has that handle error or whatever in Steal. That way we can forward it like it does in Chrome so people can see the right line number.
Yeah. So there is the no try catch in UQ unit. I don't know if that was, if you use that.
That may also be kicking in. there are several layers actually where it gets caught before it eventually gets, I guess, caught for good and doesn't trigger the unhandled exception. So I'm still working my way through that.
The other thing I noticed, you changed something to use the document element because that contains problem that you talked about. That might be a problem because we actually sometimes remove the document element, and so we actually do need to test on the actual document. It's odd.
Will that be,
we can probably work around that though.
well, will that be a problem at?
I'm not sure. I'd have to. I'm not sure. I'm not that familiar with. I might have been the one that caused that bug. But we'll talk about it. Yeah.
Worst case, we can make a like a contain a can DOM contains helper that is able to like go sniffing for the right contains. The reason is because we use a there's weird like virtual document stuff that we have to do for server-side rendering and reattachment. Awesome. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are waiting on IE 11 to do their upgrade to 5.0 or 4.0, and they'll be very happy to see this. Cool. All right, now for mine. I just wanted to show off that I got this type of for loop working in a branch. So it's basically what it is. I had to add two things to CanJS. One is I made a new type of context that holds variables and works very much like JavaScript's contexts, closures work. And normally I would use just a template literal here, but since we want everything to pass in IE 11, I have to use strings like this. You'll notice that in this example, I'm looping through users, and I have a user variable here. And then I loop through a user's to-dos, and I have a to-do variable here. But then this.isOwner is still essentially the view model of this template. So this is something that I think will help kind of roll back some of the, CanJS 4 made things, you have to, what's the opposite of terse?
Verbose.
Verbose. Made things a little bit verbose, thank you. Where you had to have a lot of, previously you'd have to write a lot of .. to make this work. Now you'd actually have to write it twice. But now this will allow you to keep the view model as your context no matter what. I'm also going to create a variables, or maybe Kevin will end up doing it, a variables helper that allows you to create variables like you would similar to how you would in JavaScript, but that kind of works very similar, even though the signature might be a little bit different. So the plan, I think, is to land this before we start doing the stash documentation. So that way we'll have essentially a 5.0 that shows this instead of #each for how you should loop through things. So that's it for me. All right, now let's do statuses, and then we'll get into, and maybe we'll go in reverse order, especially if I can find my status. So the things that I did in the last 2 weeks is, I did that for loop. Other thing that I did is I improved the stability of our routing tests quite a bit by trying to eliminate some set timeouts as much as possible. I just changed everything to do polling. If we were to spend some more time in it, I feel like anybody who does anything in routing should just clean up a little bit, make your tests, make little helpers to make async testing a little bit easier. I don't want to bring in like a Scion or anything like that, but just a few little helpers to like resolve this promise when the URL is what I expect it to be, like that kind of helpers, things that I've started to add and clean up tests with. There was a few bugs that I fixed also. Defines, if you were using define directly and using on key value, it wasn't getting the arguments correctly. Most people don't actually use define directly, so that's probably what nobody noticed, or they're binding themselves, not through the symbols, but that's fixed. Assign deep, there was a bug where the lists would just be, like it would only kind of go one level deep in the assign. and the sign deep. So that's fixed now too. One other thing that's kind of important if people are making demos, we used to have ecosystem MJS used to be where you would use that for if you wanted everything in CanJS, if you're making a CanJS 5 demo. Now that's going to be everything MJS. The setup guide now is updated to show that. I fixed a few other bugs that people had reported. The only other interesting thing that I guess I want to pay special attention to is this issue. This issue was kind of hard for me to understand what was being said, but I do want to talk about how I approach this issue. This is almost kind of my second demo, if you will, but I'll keep it short. So this issue was hard to understand for me just because the JS bin was using some vague terms. There was stuff like that didn't really, wasn't really related to the problem. And while saying this, like that's totally okay. I'd rather have people report bugs and don't, make it as good as you can, and I'll take it and work through it. But one thing I did is I don't know about I like when I get confused, I like writing stuff down. So while I was debugging this JS bin or trying to figure out what I was doing, I console logged everything, put a million console logs in, so it was logging everything, and then I just wrote out like everything that it's doing. So this is what's causing this. This is what's causing this to get logged, and so on and so forth. Kept logging until I had the aha moment where I understood what was going on. And then I came to conclusions. I like this process because even if, sometimes I feel like no one really could understand this except for me reading through it. But even if I were to come back to this problem, I would understand it much, much better because of this in this case, verbosity. I don't know how you all like to work through difficult problems, but writing a lot of my thoughts is approach that I use a lot when I start to get confused. I see nodding heads. I don't know if everybody else has other approaches they want to share. Okay, that's the only approach. It's the only thing that works.
I never encounter a difficult problem, so.
So that's, yeah, if you can figure everything out like Matthew, then you don't need like tools to get you to the answer. One other thing that was a very useful tool, of course, that people really who are using 4.0 and 5.0 need to be aware of is the log stack. This was very useful in figuring out, which was in some ways the hardest part, was like I couldn't understand why there was this like subprop define map was getting like this logging was happening. I had no idea. Well, just to give, don't have time to go into this, but this subprop get val was logging a define map, and I could not tell why. So I put a debugger in called canQ's log stack, and then I could see like, okay, I could see the reason why. Because of log stack told me like, okay, well, this happens and this happens and then this happens, which eventually got me to the answer. So when you're in trouble, remember, log stack is there for you.
It's also in DevTools. You could have used DevTools. Or
use the DevTools, yeah. So that's it for me. So in reverse order, so I guess, sorry, I went much longer than I was supposed to. The thing I'm going to be working on next week is to kind of hopefully conclude a lot of the core documentation, possibly do the for loop thing, depending on timing. But I'd really like to kind of be through the documentation issue of all of core and then starting to do the CanJS 5 video. So Thomas Wilburn, you want to give your status?
Well, it's been 3 days, so there's not a lot of status, but it's been Internet Explorer so far, and I think it'll probably be that for the foreseeable future until I can get everything passing.
Awesome. You know what? I realized what would probably help with status is to go through what we're going to be working on because then people will know their status and what to talk about. So we do that. Should we do the survey?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do the survey. Okay. So here's the survey results.
Yeah, thanks to everyone who did the survey as always. Please keep doing so.
Yeah, that's it's incredibly useful to know what people find valuable and what they don't. And to me, the thing that I find the most interesting, we talked about this, is that despite a lot of people, like even people in Bitovi being like, I don't get what this is for. Why are we doing this? This is a bad practice. Supporting dollar element on the view model got 7 votes because, in my opinion, people just want things to be easy for them to do, whether it's good for them or not. You know, if you're gonna, if you want to shoot some H up, you want, you know, a good quality spoon and, you know, a nice lighter, right?
Could have said ice cream or anything else.
Anything else.
Right, but it doesn't matter. I actually, like I said, there's some good value uses for element on the view model. But what's crazy to me is that like add type checking to define, which I think is actually really good for you. And you know, this is like, oh, we're gonna have nice, good, hard errors when people do things wrong, and make it so our components like demand what they need. Nah, I'm the only person to vote for that one. But this one. So like what I felt, this is why the you know, I think the mix of like getting the survey results, but then us as an open source team kind of debating and trying to do what, you know, we want to kind of mix up the ice cream and the you know, calisthenics. I think this is very helpful for that because it shows us that, you know, there's a demand for this. We're not picking it up this time because, you know, it did kind of meet the criteria, but it just shows like sometimes things just totally defy our expectations in terms of how many points they're going to get. So with that, what we talked about, we're going to pick, so we've still got things that we're working on. We are going to pick up these two, make CanStash even more like JavaScript and the logic guide. And then as stretch goals, we put make JS dedupe less imports and CanJS dev tools as our stretch goals that we will pick up if we feel like we can do it before the next survey. Otherwise, they'll be on the next survey to compete with whatever else is on the next survey. So the big question is, hey, what about the data guide? What gives? 1 extra person voted for that, or 3 extra people voted for that versus the logic guide. And our rationale is for why we're postponing this one is because, well, the logic guide feels more is easier to do right now because we're doing a testing guide anyways, which was previously voted on, and the logic guide and testing guide are like 2 sides of the same coin. So if they're approximately the same, we're gonna pick this one up and do that one, and then this one. We made the determination if we're going through our documentation right now, if this one is gonna, I mean, we were gonna pick up one of the top 2. If this one is gonna land, we want to do this before the documentation is kind of finished. So we really wanted to do this one right away. The data guide will probably be on the next one and vote for that again. I also do think there is a minor data guide now, which is here, this service layer guide. It isn't as nearly detailed as what the data guide that is voted on would be, but I do think that this kind of covers a little bit of ground. But you know, we'll put the data guide up next time, and we'll definitely do it then if it doesn't get voted on. Any other comments or thoughts people have on our selection choices?
I think it's interesting. I think making CanStash even more JavaScript-like is another one that kind of shot up from last time. Just always interesting to see the way that some of them become more popular over time.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so what this leaves us with is for the next 6 weeks, we're gonna finish up DoneJS 3, which is really a combination of CanJS 5 and Steel 2. We're gonna finish the documentation, cleaning up all the core documentation. Have IE11 finally working. We're gonna make that getting started video, and then we're going to make Stash even more like JavaScript, do the logic guide, and then those stretch goals of improve dev tools round 2, and Steel.js, the dedupe, so making less, so you can have just kind of like one build of all your less files. So it's pretty cool, an ambitious 6 weeks, but I think we can do it. And if we don't, we'll just do it. We'll finish it eventually anyways. So cool. All right. So with that, let's continue on status or other topics. Thomas Dillard, do you want to, I guess maybe we should do status and top demos next time together, but do you want to give your status?
I suppose that's fair. I was scheduled to do complete can define by this week. I think I will probably get it done and then continue moving on to other core JS documentation.
Cool. Awesome. Matthew.
Yeah, I wrote it down there. Last week I was helping a client upgrade to CanJS 3 and can define, so that was cool. I created the can map pat thing. I think I actually might have talked about that.
You should. Oh, okay. Because I was gonna say you should demo that if.
Yeah, I
talk about it for sure.
Demo it real quick. I can't remember if I did it or not. Can map define compat is a compatibility layer for the can map API for define maps or even for other types of observable objects. The test tested against define map and against the observe object from can observe, so we know it works there. What it does is it gives you the familiar map.adder APIs and make sure all that works. There's all the different ways you can use it. Remove adder is included in this as well. We talked about maybe adding support for some of the other kind of weird stuff that can maps can do. But for now, this covers a lot of things, so that's good. I use this to help upgrade an app from can map to define map, and I found it really useful in kind of an interesting way. It was interesting because I used it and then I immediately removed it, if that makes sense. Like I added it to my app like very quickly, just change can map to define map in the project, add this mix in, and make sure everything works. And once you know everything works, all you have to do is remove the adder calls, because at that point, like all the actual real issues have been resolved. And then it's just a matter of doing the manual process of changing everything to the dot syntax.
And it logs, right, where you're using
yeah, it'll log.
Yeah, a line number.
It'll log. But that makes it nice because you can kind of quickly get to the hard part, the important part, which is making sure your app works, and then the tedious part can come at the end. So you can kind of, if you just want to be like, hey, I want to maybe upgrade to define map, but I'm not sure if it's going to work, you can do this in like an hour and see if it works. And if it does, well, that's great. Now you just have to do the tedious part. So yeah,
the big place was probably that the define map doesn't support the change event.
I didn't run into that myself.
Oh, nice. Your project wasn't using the change event.
No, it was not using. It was not.
Well done, whoever that project was.
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah, they had some cases where they were expecting like the define property and stuff like that, and had to kind of figure out how to work around that. And then there were some cases where I had to learn myself, where they were doing like updates. And I had to like, should I use a sign here, or do I need to use update here, and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, for the most part, it's pretty straightforward.
Awesome.
Anyways,
cool.
Yeah, that wasn't much of a status. Otherwise, I've been working on DoneJS 3. But yeah.
Cool. Kevin.
Yep. So I kind of already gave my status in my demo. So the last couple of weeks, I've been working on all the routing guide updates and the recipe that went along with it. So that should be wrapped up today. And then next week, I'll be starting on the testing and logic guide. Like you mentioned, those kind of go hand in hand. So I'll probably work on them together.
Awesome. Sheriff, how are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm still on client work, and maybe next week also I will be on the client project.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. I think topics. Kevin, I think you had one topic.
I do have a topic. We got some time. So yeah, I've been starting to think about how to make this new routing pattern a little bit easier. Here, let me share my screen. Easier to talk about. So this is the final code for that recipe, and it's much nicer than doing all of this in your view, but there's still like a lot of things that you have to set up to get it to work. So basically, to use this pattern, you have to, in your view, you've got something where you're displaying the component, and then there's kind of two things you have to figure out. It's like, where do you load the component from, and then what data do you pass to that component's view model? So a lot of that can get kind of tricky, and there's a lot of things for people to understand. So I've been trying to think through how we can make this easier. So the idea that I have right now is kind of something that looks like this, which is very kind of similar to how views router works, where you would kind of create this configuration object that would map your route to a specific component, or in this case, it's a function that returns a promise for a component. You could also just like do the home component here if you want to load it synchronously. And then also some sort of configuration for the data that you want to pass as the view model for that component. So the configuration itself, I think, is fine. Like, we can figure out what these options need to be. But what I've been trying to figure out is like, how do we actually want to set this up? We don't really want to have like a global configuration. So one thing that I've been thinking is maybe you can pass like a router object to components, or maybe this is a special type of component that's something like router component or whatever, so that it handles kind of all of the glue of this. So I don't know, I wanted to throw this out and see if people have ideas for how we can like make this configuration possible. If not, I can post an issue and people can think it over and throw ideas out on there. But
yeah, I guess, well, the one thing is, I would assume that, you know, you have your routes configuration.
mm-hmm.
Is that not one-to-one?
Like one-to-one.
Like, what does the route object mean there? Route.
This one? So it wouldn't have to be, right? You could have, and maybe it is. Maybe it's just, so the problem is, like, if you have your route set up like page / whatever section, you might want to map to different components based on either of these properties, right? So it's not necessarily one.
But then can you do like a nested structure then? So like it can identify the structure that this is a component structure, so it's like the end of the road, versus like you keep nesting down.
You're saying do something like this and just say home is an object, and then in here. But
then there could be like an array, and then it's like, or something, I don't know. Yeah, it's another object. Yeah, so if it's like section 1, let's go to this, it's section 2. Otherwise, you can templatize it, and I don't know.
Where do you actually register your route strings?
Yeah, that's a good question too. We probably have to, we'd obviously have to pass that to this component as well, I think.
Your what strings?
Like these, the routes.
Oh, well, but why wouldn't home just be like or like if it was just, if you wanted it to be home, then / section, you would put section in inside the object.
So yeah, my initial idea was that it would figure out what routes you need based on this, but that wouldn't be perfect, because you might want to. So
okay, so maybe to step back, I think our goal should not be to make a super extensible solves every problem routing solution, because then just go to what CanRoute is now, and it has like you have full freedom and flexibility to do whatever the hell you want there.
Right.
So because then it's like, if you want that, go check out this more advanced routing. If you just want, to me, it's like there's a relative, like there's a kind of a one-directional mapping, relatively easy net file, like folder nested kind of structure to a component that's going to be one component at a time that's going to be on the page. And then the only other thing that it needs to deal with, well, I think, is session state, which is, you know, I don't know how it should handle that, but to be able to say like, if the person's logged out, even just like that, there's really like there's only really, I think, if you have a session that's, if it's like, there's kind of only two apps in my opinion, maybe a third, but there's two main apps, the kind of apps that are like, you can go to almost every single page. It doesn't matter if you're logged in or not. Like Bitballs is like that. You can see almost every single page, and then if you're logged in, you get all this editing functionality. And then there's another group of pages, which is like, you can't go to any pages unless you're logged in. And I think it should just solve both of those problems. Maybe it can do a little bit of mix, like some you need the session before it kicks you to some login page. But that's it. Just there's a login sign up page that are like, if you have no session, and there's certain pages that you have to say the session. And it's just very simple, only solves that one pattern. That would be my vote. And if you need anything bigger, then you go to CanRoute. I don't know how y'all feel about that. That's how I feel.
I don't know. I don't know what that has to do with the solution, though.
Well, it's your design challenge, right? It guides what you're weighing for, is this a good solution or not? Like if we start talking about like, well, what if someone needs to do this or this or this? If you just say like, we don't care about those weird edge cases because we have something that solves those edge cases, then it can constrain what you're designing for a lot.
Yeah, but there's still. Are we assuming that people's URLs are very uniform then too?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for this, I'm assuming like essentially CanJS is going to run the show, and we're just going to say this is like conventional stuff. We're just going to do things the way that we think that they should normally be structured. You know, you want more freedom and flexibility, go CanRoute.
Yeah. Sure. I'm fine with that. Yeah, it's still a hard problem, even if you have even if you make those assumptions.
Oh, for sure, but easier though.
Yeah. Only other thing, Kevin, I'm not sure about passing a router into a component. Just because I feel like you would only ever do that to one component, so it seems foot gunny to be able to pass it to any component. But it could be, like you said, maybe a different type of component. But why would the component?
Well, there are. So I know, like, there's a team at. Well, again, this is like, do we care? That's why I almost don't care. There's another team at Toby who does have a pretty substantive routing with all these guides and things like that. And what they wanted to do is kind of have like a high-level router where it's like there's these like 5 main pages, and then like, but underneath that you can have this nested routing, and the rules there are kind of, you know, you can kind of have like parent-child. So like this router is essentially like continuing on from this other place. Again, I don't know if we want to solve that. I almost prefer we don't solve that because CanRoute can do that.
So what does this give you, though? I mean, does this give you this router object? What exactly is that? Let's say you did go back to the way you used to have it. Let's say you do pass it to a component. Do you have a router property on your view model? Is that what you get? And you can say, you can like put that in your template. Is that kind of how it's meant to be used?
Yeah. So the idea with either that component way or this way, it's still going to register a component that sets this up and basically sets up your view model with a component property that's going to get rendered and does all this route registration and all this stuff for you.
Yeah, I get that. So the properties are going to be like what's in your routes object, or how do I know what I can use in my view model, I guess? Or is it just going to be certain things?
My idea was that the routes thing that you pass would be used in order to create this route data property. And then you could also pass a view model if you want to create like your own function, like whatever properties you need for your app. You can create this, and then those can be passed to the child components through these bindings. So I was thinking you'd still be able to create a view model, and it would just get extended with what we need for routing.
Okay. So there'd be like maybe 2 or 3 properties on this special view model. And that's
why couldn't it just be a prop-def object? Essentially, export a prop-def object. So like on view model, you could just have routed component promise or something like that. Instead of routes on there, just make like it's a component, but on your view model, you just put, a component routed or page component promise, and then it is whatever that construct X is returning. You know what I mean? It's a prop definition. It's going to provide a getter and a setter and whatever else, and just hook into your view model. Provide a default. All that. So
what? Yeah, but what is you're saying that you would not pass this separately? You would pass it here?
Yeah, just pass the view model, because then that's how people know already. So you just do like page component. You call page component, and then just type in page. I get
what you're saying.
Yeah, page component. Well, it would be lowercase presumably, but and then you would call like your router. Yeah. Parentheses, pass in your data there, and it just returns something that goes like that. And normally it would probably be defined up above and separate, but it is returning you this thing that you can just stick on and then you can use in your view, and that's just going to be the page.
Yeah, you could do that.
Anywho.
Just you still have, remember like 3 years ago you created something like Can App, or I can't remember what it was called. DoneJS or something. You still have that around?
Yeah, it's probably somewhere.
Interesting, just to compare.
Cool. Any other topics people want to talk about? All right. Kevin, is there an issue for this?
There will. Yeah, I'm going to post one now.
Okay.
With this.
Awesome. So look out for that, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.